What's up everyone, my name is Nick and I am a super nice guy. Today we'll be designing a loader animation using After Effects and LottieFiles. I'm going to walk through how to set everything up if you've never done this before, and also just my approach at designing and putting together this loader animation. It's going to be a pretty basic loader animation that will be spinning, it will loop forever, and it will have some color so we can add a little creativity to it. And by the end of it, we'll have a JSON file that we can hand off to development and they can throw in your animation wherever they need it. Let's jump in. Alright, so before we actually start making anything, we're gonna need to make sure we have what we need. And what we need is After Effects, the LottieFiles plugin, and a free LottieFiles account. So let's get that all set up first. Okay, so if you just go to LottieFiles.com, you will be able to see a sign up button over here and create a free account really quickly. We're going to need that to hook into the After Effects plugin, so you'll have to do that up front. Next, after we've gotten our account set up, we're going to need to download the LottieFiles plugin for After Effects. And this can be done in one of two ways. I use the ZXP Installer for After Effects. I've just used this for a long time, but I also just quickly tested out this newer thing, which is Adobe Exchange, and it'll install it through your Creative Cloud account. So either one of these work fine. If you use the ZXP link here, you're going to need the installer, which I'll link all this stuff in the description below, but no matter which one you do, they both get you up and running really quickly. If you use the ZXP installer, when you click this link, you're actually going to end up with a file that you'll just drop into here and it will install quickly to After Effects. You can see I already have it dropped in and installed, no problemo. And once you get all that stuff set up, we can now open up After Effects and jump in. Okay, so first, before we do anything else, we need to make sure we set a preference here that will actually allow LottieFiles to work correctly. So if we go into Preferences and Scripting and Expressions, once that menu comes up, then we can click this first option here. We have to make sure it is checked. Allow scripts to write files and access network. So now you can hit OK and we're ready to go. We'll create a new project. We're gonna wanna save it right away, just a good practice, and call it something like Animate a Loader. Alright, so the way I like to work in After Effects is to make sure everything is organized right off the bat. So we're gonna create some quick file structures here, and we're gonna say assets, and if you click the little folder icon there, you can create a new folder. So the first one will just say assets. The next one, we will call it 01 comps. And then we're gonna want another one, 02 pre-comps. That should be good to go. I just like to set these up in a sort of numerical order since I'm sorting by name. I'll have assets always at the top. 01 comps will be my main compositions that I'm exporting and working from. And we might not use pre-comps for this, but I always like to include it. If we start making any nested animations, we can keep those separate from the main composition folder. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do now that we have that all set up is create a new composition here. We're just gonna call it Loader. I have these set to a composition size of 1000 by 1000, so just a square composition will do for this, and I like to work at a little bit higher resolution. And then I have square pixels and frame rate is set to 60. That's pretty typical for doing any sort of UI animations. You want them as smooth as possible, and 60 will ensure that's how they come out. And for duration, we're just gonna set this to something like 5 seconds. Nice and short. It's gonna be a looping animation, so we're not gonna need that much length on the timeline. Cool, so now we're ready to click OK and create that composition, and this is what we have here. A nice white square for our loader animation. So the way I'm going to build it is creating a simple circle shape that will encompass a good portion of this composition here, and we're going to do it with a shape layer. So if we select layer at the top and go into new and then shape layer, you won't see anything at first, but this is essentially creating the parent element in which we can add shapes to. So if we twirl down this menu here, what we can do is press the little add button and we can create an ellipse inside this shape layer. So when it drops in, by default, it's pretty small because we're working at this higher resolution of 1000 by 1000, but we can actually come down here and open up the ellipse path and see the size is set to 100 by 100. We can either click into this and type something or just drag left or right inside there to scale it. But we're gonna wanna put this to something like, I don't know, 550. It's not super important because the SVG can always be scaled later on in development. It's also important to note, it's just a good practice if working with a path, essentially a vector path, it's better to manipulate the actual values here rather than going into transform and adjusting the scale in a percentage based, because this way we can ensure we're at 100% of 550 pixels. So now we have the ellipse dropped in, and this is already starting to look like what we want it to. It's just a basic circle. We're going to need to add a stroke to this, and we're going to do so in the same way we added the ellipse. So inside the shape layer, which I might also rename by selecting shape layer 1 and pressing enter, and then calling it loader circle, just to keep things nice and organized and so I know what the shape layer is. So again, inside our loader circle layer, we are going to press add, and we're going to add a stroke. Now the stroke comes in, at least mine does by default, with white and 2 pixels. We can't really see that. So there's two things we can do. If we open up stroke, then we can see the color that it's taking on here, which is white, and the stroke width. We can also see that up top here. It doesn't really matter which one you edit, but one of those we'll go into and make a nice shade of purple and press OK. And now we're going to want to make the stroke really big, so I'll just make this perhaps 50 pixels. Now we're going to see how this will animate. We're going to have it fill in from 0% to 100% in a clockwise motion. And to achieve this, it's a pretty simple effect. Again, we're going to select this shape layer, loader circle, press add, and we're going to add something called trim paths. Now, to quickly illustrate what trim paths does is if I select one of these, let's say end, which is at currently 100%, and we bring it back all the way to 0. Now you probably already know what's going to happen. We're going to animate from 0% end to 100% end, and that will present our animation as a spinning, filling circle. I do want to quickly pause there. If we just dial this end back a little bit, we'll see that we have these hard squared edges or endpoints. We don't want those. So if we go under stroke, we have some options for line cap, which are currently set to butt cap. If we open that, we'll want to make it round cap just to make it a little more friendly and delightful. And I think we can close up the stroke menu and actually close the ellipse path. So right now we're just working inside trim paths to keep things nice and simple. These are the only things we need to worry about right this second. So now we can jump into the timeline and start dropping some keyframes. So the first is to put this end percentage to 0, and we're going to click the stopwatch button to start the animation and drop a keyframe in there. And then we can adjust this later, but let's just start off with about 1 second here on the timeline, and we'll put the end value to 100%. Also, if we press N on the keyboard, we can snap our workable area to where the marker is currently and just look at this animation here. And if you weren't aware, just pressing spacebar will trigger a playback of your animation, and so I'll be doing this throughout my process to keep analyzing how the animation looks and adjusting it accordingly. So right now, auditing, what we're seeing is when it gets to 100%, it will then go to 0 and it doesn't make a full loop. So the way we're going to achieve a full loop will be to have the end of the animation chase its tail, so to speak, chase all the way back to 0, and so it doesn't fill up fully, it's more cycling through along this circle path. And I'll show what I mean right now. If we just go to near the end of the animation, we'll see that it's retaining the full fill as it goes all the way around. and that's because we're using the end animation. If we use the start animation at the same time, you'll see exactly what's happening, where it follows that end point, and by the end of it there is no filled circle and it will make a perfect loop. And so this goes from 0 to 100%, and that's what we'll want to animate. So let's go to the beginning of the animation and press the stopwatch on start while it's at 0%, and we'll come over to the last keyframe and slide that up to 100%. Now nothing will be visible right now because they're essentially canceling each other out, but if we make our animation a little bit longer to about 1 second and 10 frames, and we pull these a few frames out from the ending, then what we have is this. And because they're evenly spaced out, again, it's essentially canceling out any motion and retaining that distance the entire time, and that's not what we want. So what we're going to do is take this last endpoint, this last keyframe for start, and we're going to want that to hit 100% at the same time that end hits 100%. And so what this does is allow the end animation a little head start, but it will follow all the way and then end at the same point, which will give us our full loop. It's still really short, and that's not what we want. So we're going to need to give the end animation a little bit more head start. If we just play with this a little bit and pull that start keyframe to something a little further along, like maybe the 20 frames out, and then let's see how that looks. So that's the right idea, but the issue with this right now, and it's a perfect time to do it because we have most of our keyframes laid out, is to convert them from a linear animation to an eased animation. And what this does is emulate more of a real world movement where things don't just move in a linear way, but they're affected by outside forces such as gravity and velocity and so on. And so what we'll do is select all of these keyframes. We can actually press U on the keyboard and it will close everything up and only show our animated properties. This is super helpful just to stay organized and focused on exactly what we're working on and blocking out all of the rest of the noise. And so what we're going to do is, with these keyframes selected, we'll right click on them and go down to Keyframe Assistant and Easy Ease. And you'll notice they changed into this sort of hourglass shape. And after we've done that, we can preview again and we'll see that the movement is much more realistic and delightful. It looks better for sure, but it's definitely not there yet. It's pretty default. This is the default setting that Easy Ease comes in After Effects, so we're going to want to customize that a little bit to make it a little bit more compelling. So again, keeping all the keyframes selected, we'll go into the graph editor here, which is just an easing curve inside of a graph icon. We'll toggle that on and we'll see we have two easing curves that start at separate times and end at the same point. We're going to draw a marquee over all of these and we get these awesome handlebars. So if we drag on these top handlebars, we can pull them pretty aggressively to around that amount there, and we're going to want to do the same thing with the bottom easing curves as well and pull those in pretty aggressively. So you can kind of see illustrated what's going to happen. There's a longer time for acceleration where the animation starts slower. There's a shorter distance where it will really speed up, and then there's a longer distance where it will decelerate to the end as well. Now I do notice that the orange here has a bit more of an aggressive curve than the purple. So I'm going to look over here. The purple is the end animation. I'll just click on that alone, and I want to make that a little bit more aggressive so I can have that more closely matched to what the two easing curves are doing. And so selecting them both again, this looks much more appropriate where it should follow in a similar path here. The other thing you can do to make sure these are aligned properly is to just move them back before you edit anything, and you can ensure that they're the same at that point. You see right here that they're not exactly the same, but I don't think that's going to be an issue here. So I'm going to undo that and slide that back over. And now we'll press spacebar to preview our changes. This animation is much more snappy, and I'm definitely liking how it's looking in real time. Now that we're pretty happy with how this basic one ring animation looks. We're gonna see how we can spruce it up and add a little bit more creativity to it without adding much extra work and keeping all of our animations essentially the same and intact. We're going to duplicate what we've already created and tweak some settings and change the color and create a really cool effect. So let's do that now. If we just select on this loader circle and press Command D, we will duplicate it, and we're gonna change the colors of these. So we'll rename loader circle by selecting it, press enter, to loader circle purple, and then we're gonna use maybe a yellow for this top layer. So if we select it and press enter and call it loader circle yellow, and with that what we can actually do is select this layer and press U again and show the same parameters that have been edited and keyframed. At the top here, we can click the stroke color. The stroke color we're going to set to this nice yellow here. That looks plenty good enough. And then next we're going to offset it a bit. So we're going to make a staggered animation here. If we select these keyframes for the yellow layer and pull them out, we'll want to pull them out to about 10 frames here. So we'll drag them over where we've set that marker, and then we'll need to expand this by another 10 frames for the workable area, and we'll see what that looks like now. You can see here what we're getting is the same exact animation and a little bit more interest. And what I'm seeing here is this distance in between these two lines. That's not what we want. It looks like we've staggered or offset our keyframes by a little bit too much. I'm going to restart here, and I'm going to advance in frame amounts, frame increments, so I can use a little bit of math and create a rhythm here. So if I press page down, I will advance a frame. Also, if you open up the preview panel and you see next frame, it does the same thing here. So I can count how many frames I'm going, and I will say 1, 2, 3, and we'll see what that looks like. So let's drag all of these keyframes to that third frame out from the original and press spacebar. I'm looking at this animation and I don't like how the yellow is appearing later and really abruptly on top of that purple. And it also tends to dominate this loader animation when really the purple is what I want to be what you remember about it. To achieve this, we're just going to drag that yellow layer behind the purple layer and see what that looks like. That is much more in the realm of what I'm trying to achieve here, where the color is trailing behind. There's a brief moment where you see a lot of it, but it's really just accenting the purple. And now for the beautiful and fun and easy part with this approach is we can just do this as much as we want and get as crazy as we want with it. I'm going to select the yellow layer again and press Command D and rename this to a red or magenta because that's the color I'm going to drop in here. I'm going to press U on it just to pull up all the keyframes so I can see what's going on. Then I'm going to click on the stroke for it, and we'll set this to sort of reddish, pinkish, magenta, maybe something like that. Now again, looking at this, we've just covered up the yellow completely, but I think I want the red color to trail the purple and the yellow to trail the red. Since we've duplicated the yellow, we can see we have the yellow and the red in tandem with one another. We're going to stagger the yellow, being this bottom layer here, 3 more frames out. So if I go over this second point where we've marked 3 frames out, which we can also see here on the left, we're going to do the same thing where we advance 3 frames, and then we'll drag all of the yellow to that new point, which is 6 frames out. Then again, we'll press spacebar and check out how that looks. Awesome, it's looking pretty good. The only thing I'm noticing now, being that we have the general animation completed, the majority of our work is finished, we're starting to look at the details of this animation. So when I'm looking at the end here, I'm seeing these dots flickering out and it doesn't have this cohesive look. It's a little jarring. At this point, I'm going to start deciding perhaps some of this animation can be cut out. The viewer doesn't need to see every single frame, and in fact, if we cut some things out, it will improve the effect we're going for. So I'm gonna say perhaps at frame 1 second and 4 or frame 64 here. I'm gonna press N and shorten the playable area to cut this animation short. I'm also gonna do the same thing at the beginning because there's quite a bit of time when you see just the purple dot and it starts to move, and we can cut into that animation and make it way more effective. So let's go to around 12 here and we'll press B, which will snap the front of the playable area. And after pressing play here, I realized that we're still getting a little flicker, and that's because we need to end the animation the last second that purple is still visible. So that's actually at 59 milliseconds or the 59th frame, and we'll press end there and then preview that animation. Again, from the trusty playback and reviewing how things look, I realized I cut in a little bit too much on the animation. I want to put it at about the 7th frame and press B again, and our playable area has extended a little bit at the beginning, and I think we have a much smoother animation when we preview that. Alright, and one last thing I'm gonna do after playing back this loop quite a few times and realizing I think maybe the trailing effect of the colors is happening a tad too fast. And so this is the normal workflow and process of a motion designer. You're constantly iterating and tweaking and trying to look at this thing objectively and figure out what you're going for. So because I think it's going too fast on the color trails, what I'm going to do is go into the graph editor, select all of these start keyframes by command clicking on them. And then with each of those curves here, again, what's happening to produce the speedy effect is it's a little aggressive when the curve goes straight up or close to straight up here. So I'm gonna select the top 3 and I'm gonna bring these back just a little bit, and then select the bottom 3 points here and bring those back just a little bit. And then we'll toggle off the graph editor and we'll preview that animation. That's looking much smoother and way closer to the desired effect I was going for. Alright, so we finished animating and we have this thing ready to go, so we're gonna export it with Lottie or view it in the Lottie extension. So now we'll go up into Window and Extensions and open LottieFiles. Before I go any further, it's important to call out a couple quick things. The first being, if you're seeing a giant caution triangle with an exclamation point in it, it's because you haven't gone into After Effects preferences, scripting and expressions, and toggled on the first checkbox, which is allow scripts to write files and access network. The second state you might see is, which you'll see the first time if it's working correctly, is a login sign in. You're going to need to make sure you're logged in with LottieFiles on the website I showed at the beginning and click login or connect or whatever it shows you. But once you get all that set up, we are in and ready to rock. What we have here in this first tab is all of the exportable animations here in a list. So we just have the one called loader. If we go into the eyeball, all the other animations we've created will appear here as well. So now all that's left to do is click on the little green arrow here and it will render your animation, and we have it here ready to go. We can upload it to our LottieFiles, which will populate it in this section here, or we can download or save as a specific JSON file, which we hand to development, and everyone is happy. Also, the beauty of uploading it to your files is that you can go to your LottieFiles profile page or click this button here and it will take you there. And from there, you will see the animation attached to your profile, and you can click handoff and also download it here. So you can send your developers an actual link, or you can also send them the actual JSON file. All right, we've just designed and animated our simple loader animation. We've done so in a way that easily allows us to hand off our animation to developers so they can implement it in whatever they're building. As always, if you got something from this video, please remember to like and subscribe. It would really help me out, and share with me whatever stuff you're creating, or if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. I will be happy to answer them. Well, I guess until next time, super nice guy out.